Good morning and welcome to the Assembly for Monday the 8th of November 2021. This week's Assembly is presented by me, Mrs Watson, and through this Assembly we explore our core value of respect. So what's been in the news this week? All of the lights. Last weekend, Hindus and Sikhs all over the world celebrated Diwali, the Festival of Lights, with family parties, fireworks and wonderful food. Day of the Dead. While many of us celebrated Halloween, Mexicans celebrated Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Dead, which is time to remember the beauty of life. Youth Voice at COP26. As you know, COP26 is currently happening in Glasgow, Scotland. Last week, world leaders heard from a range of young people who made their voices heard. Little Amal Big Message. A giant puppet called Little Amal arrived in Manchester last weekend, having travelled from Turkey. She is raising awareness about child refugees. So this week it's Remembrance Day on the 11th. But what is remembrance? In times of conflict and emergency, there are always people trying to help and protect others. Remembrance is a time when we remember and give thanks for the people who help and protect others now and who have done so in the past. We remember those who have been hurt or killed as a result. Remembrance is hope for a peaceful future. Who do we remember? We remember the service and sacrifice of the armed forces from Britain and the Commonwealth. We pay tribute to the special contribution of families and of the emergency services. We acknowledge innocent civilians who have lost their lives in conflict or acts of terrorism. How do we remember? We remember through symbols, monuments, sound and movement. So, visiting a monument or special place, the Sikh War Memorial. Sikh faith does not allow for the use of idols or statues, as Sikhs are taught to worship only God and that God has no physical form. So in 1918, the idea of having a war memorial or a statue to commemorate the war dead was at odds with the Sikh faith. Instead, the Sikh communities used prayer to remember their dead. In the early 2000s, as the centenary of the First World War approached, British Sikhs became concerned that the story of Sikh soldiers during the wars was at risk of being forgotten by non-Sikhs. They thought that a memorial would act as a reminder to the rest of the nation and would tell their story. One of the first Sikh war memorials was commissioned in 2002 in Coventry, and more have followed, such as those in Huddersfield and Bristol. In 2015, Captain Jay Singh Sola was part of the team that unveiled a new memorial at the National Memorial Arboretum in Staffordshire. Unlike the Coventry War Memorial, it has a figure, but one that was purposefully designed to represent all soldiers rather than a particular individual. They used the publicity around the event to share the story of Sikh soldiers in the media. Writing a poem. Laura Muka. Poet Laura Muka was one of the first people in the UK to visit the Remembrance Glade in the National Memorial Arboretum. I was really struck by just how many people had served and died. There were just so many names. The memorial served to remind me that my peace, safety and freedom is built on the sacrifice of others. She also reflected on her personal reasons for making remembrance. My grandfather served in the Second World War, and I used to visit him at the Royal British Legion Club every week after school, so it felt very important to write this poem of remembrance for him and for the other soldiers who didn't make it back. Laura wrote a poem of remembrance which used the imagery of symbolism of the trees in the glade to express the emotions of remembrance, and we're going to listen to that poem now.
We remember. Why do you droop, willows? We remember the roll of hills, the whole of roads filled with soldiers, soldiers, soldiers. Why are you silent, willows? We remember the burst of shells, the burn of skin, the boil of rage, bubbling, bubbling. Why do you groan, willows? We remember the ooze of wounds, the stench of death, the stains of war. Hating, hating. Why do you creak, willows? We remember the weight of grief, the wail of loss, and the wait for peace. Waiting, waiting. Why do you weep, willows? We remember the surging, smashing, thumping, thrashing, losing, lashing. We remember the yearning, writing, searing, slicing, sacrificing. We remember the pounding, quaking, bombing, breaking, hoping, aching. We remember all too clearly, all too often. We weep because others forget.
2 minute silence. Bill marks remembrance on his doorstep. Having been forced to shield at home with his daughter during the COVID-19 pandemic, former able seaman Seymour Bill Taylor, 95, said he would be remembering his comrades on his doorstep. Bill served in the Royal Navy during the Second World War and was part of the D-Day operation with HMS Emerald defending Sword, Gold and Juno beaches, shelling the enemy from the deck before his ship was hit by an unexploded bomb and it had to be anchored back to Portsmouth. In 2020, Bill was unable to mark the 75th anniversaries of VE and VJ Day in person, but thanks to the use of modern technology, including video calls, Bill still managed to be part of the anniversaries from home. Although I won't be able to march up to the local memorial this year to remember those we have lost, I will proudly observe the silence on my doorstep and wear my poppy as I do every year with pride. Military parades in Barbados. In October 1915, the British West Indies Regiment, BWIR, was formed. At that time, many Caribbean islands were still part of the British Empire. It is estimated that tens of thousands of people from the West Indies joined the war efforts, but the total number is still not known. Many feel their story has been erased. Today, stories of West Indian service and sacrifice are still being rediscovered. Today, Barbados is part of the Commonwealth, and Remembrance Day is commemorated on the 11th of November each year. There are similarities in the ways Commonwealth countries mark remembrance each year. Anzac Day in Australia and New Zealand. On the 25th of April, Australia and New Zealand commemorate Anzac Day. On that day, in 1915, the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps, Anzac, landed at Gallipoli, their first campaign of the First World War. The first Anzac Day was held in 1916 in honour of those killed at Gallipoli. It's now become a public holiday and grown to commemorate all Anzac forces who have ever served. The day begins with a dawn service representing the time of day that the Anzac forces landed on the Turkish peninsula. This is followed by another service mid-morning and then the Anzac Day March. In 2020, public events were cancelled, but many still commemorated the day. People were encouraged to light up the dawn by going to the end of their driveway with a candle at around 6 a.m. The local radio stations would then play the last post, recite the ode, hold a minute's silence, and then play the reveal and the Australian national anthem. Remembrance Day in Ghana. It is estimated that 65,000 people from Ghana served in the Second World War, mostly in India and Burma. They served as part of the British Army because Ghana was part of the British Empire at that time. In Ghana, Remembrance Day is marked on the 11th of November with a special service taking place at 11 a.m. Music plays an important role throughout the ceremony. There are similarities with the UK remembrance services, such as hymns being sung and buglers playing the last post. In 2020, the Ghanaian National Centre for Culture also incorporated Ghana's unique history and traditions by including a dance to honour veterans. The late Mrs. Joan Bunn. Joan was a firewoman in the Second World War. Each year before Remembrance Sunday, she took a wooden remembrance cross to Mr. Kerridge, who ran a butcher's shop in Widenham Town, Norfolk. He and his brothers served in the First World War, but his brother Frank and Arthur were killed in action. He would write their names on the cross, and when he could no longer do it himself, Joan did it for him. Joan would then place the cross in the small garden surrounding the town war memorial. Jo continued to perform this act of remembrance as long as she was able to. Joan also volunteered with the Widenham branch of the Royal British Legion for many years. Mr. Kerridge died aged 100 in 1999. When his coffin left Widenham Abbey draped with his Union Jack, 14 members of the Royal British Legion formed a guard of honour. Craig Daniel. Tattoos are a significant and permanent act of remembrance in the British Armed Forces. Inked onto the skin, they commemorate friends who have served, illustrate personal sacrifices, and mark the lasting bonds formed between men and women who live, train, and fight together. After he was medically discharged in 2016, Craig decided to keep the memory of those who'd lost their lives in service, as well as honour members of his family that had passed away, with a tattoo sleeve on his leg. Craig's sleeve includes a medic signifying his first deployment as part of the Heliborne Medical Evacuation Response Team. In this role, he and his team evacuated critically injured casualties from the battlefields of Helmand, often under fire in the back of a Chinook helicopter. An image of a soldier approaching a clock was inspired by his belief that his time was up when he was discharged from the RAF. His tattoos also include a poppy, as well as the name of his friend Ryan, who was killed on patrol in Afghanistan, aged 21. How do we remember? Through symbols, special days, the 11th of November, Polish commemoration of Monte Cassino, Anzac Day in Australia and New Zealand. Flowers, the poppy in the UK and much of Europe. Marigolds are worn in India and Pakistan. The cornflower known as the Boulette de France in France. Life and death, laying wreaths, service for the unknown warrior. Through monuments, stone memorials, the cenotaph, war cemeteries, lists of the fallen. Living monuments, the Remembrance Glade at the National Memorial Arboretum. Art and architecture, Coventry Cathedral, poetry, paintings. Sound and movement, the Cenotaph March Past, 2-minute silence, dancing and music, bugle call, Festival of Remembrance. On the 9th of November, we will remember those who lost their lives in the Croydon tram derailment in 2016. On Thursday, the 11th of November, we will take part in Remembrance Day by holding a 2-minute silence in the Surrey Playground at 11 a.m.
Let's break the silence on the 2-minute silence and pause. You see, it's not about which side of the argument you side with. Think of it as an act of kindness. You may not know their names, you may never meet them face to face, but imagine what it must feel like to never again see the face of your brother or your best mate. Imagine all you had left was the pictures they left on Facebook or a backpack full of their old school books. This is more than some war in your history textbook. You don't have to agree with the politicians. You don't have to like their decisions, but you can decide to empathize. And yeah, it can be awkward just standing there, but try this. Try closing your eyes. Remember those who risked their lives knowing every second might be their last. So if we give them a second or 2 minutes, is that really too much to ask? Let that football roll to a stop. Let your conversation reach a full stop. Mute your phone, close the laptop, pause your coffee, switch off the telly. Because when it comes to empathy, we can all stand at the front line. And on 11/11, we can all choose to unite. We need to talk about the silence and then pause. Lest we forget, this moment is ours.
Between the 14th and the 21st November, it's Interfaith Week in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. The aims of the week are to increase understanding, awareness and connections between communities of different faiths. So, in tomorrow's Votes for School session, you will be discussing, should more people get involved with religious celebrations? Let's listen to some views now. Knowing that everyone was joining in would make celebrations feel extra special and we would learn a lot. Celebrations are all about love, kindness and sharing. These are things everyone can do, no matter their beliefs. People might forget about the religious part and only want to do the fun parts, then the true meaning is lost. Actions like fasting or prayer are important for some celebrations. Not everyone will want to do things like this. So don't forget to vote along with your tutor group tomorrow. And there will also be an opportunity for you to vote individually and share your views on Google Classrooms. Thank you for listening. Have a good week.